Hi, I'm Len Epp from Leanpub, and in this Lean Publishing podcast, I'll be interviewing Jason Gilmore. Jason is a Columbus, Ohio-based software developer, writer, and consultant. His recent projects include a Linux-powered autonomous environmental monitoring buoy and an e-commerce analytics application for a globally recognized publisher. Jason is the author of 8 books on web development, including the best-selling Beginning PHP and Mysql 4th edition, Easy PHP Websites with the Zen Framework 2nd edition, and 3 Leanpub books, Easy Active Record for Rails Developers, Easy Laravel 5, and most recently, Easy E-Commerce using Laravel and Stripe, which he wrote along with his co-author Eric Barnes. Jason has also published over 300 articles in publications such as Developer.com, JS Mag, and Linux Magazine, and he has instructed hundreds of students in the United States and Europe. In this interview, we're going to talk about Jason's professional interests, his books, his experiences using Leanpub, and ways we can improve Leanpub for him and other authors. So thank you, Jason, for being on the Lean Publishing Podcast.
Well, thank you for having me. It's quite a pleasure and an honor.
Thanks. I'd like to start maybe with a biographical question, going way back, perhaps. Can you tell us how you first became interested in being a software developer?
Sure. I think I've spent the majority of my life sitting in front of a computer of varying types, and by the time I went to college, it was really a foregone conclusion that I would wind up in software just out of a pure interest in the topic that has, again, it's been a lifelong interest. And I really at the time didn't know where I would end up in the software world, but I just knew I had to find a place somewhere within the industry, and I've had a lot of fun ever since.
So did you study computer science?
I did. I studied computer science at The Ohio State University, based right here in Columbus, Ohio. And upon graduation, have since spent the majority of the last 17 years or so working for really a wide variety of companies and clientele. I've spent the majority of my career working as an independent contractor. And I've worked with universities, with startups, small mom and pop type businesses, and as well as a lot of other larger organizations as well. And I've always found it, I guess, very interesting because no matter whether it's a mom and pop organization or a large company, there's always a new and unique angle to the project you're working on. So I've really enjoyed really every minute of it, I guess.
I imagine working freelance or well, maybe perhaps independently might be a better word, must have a lot of advantages in terms of control over your time and the projects that you're working on.
Oh, I'm absolutely, especially I think, and this happens to a lot of, I guess, more experienced developers, you over time begin to have the luxury, if you will, of choosing more interesting projects. And that has certainly been the case in recent years. I've had the opportunity to work on a variety of e-commerce projects, both on the sales side and the analytics side. I've worked on some data warehousing projects. And as you mentioned in my bio, had this really, really fascinating opportunity to work on a Linux-powered environmental monitoring device, which was way out of my general scope of knowledge. So it was quite a challenging project and a lot of fun. So like I said, it's great to work in this capacity because there really always seems to be something interesting going on.
Yeah, it sounds really interesting, and to have such a wide array of things to work on, and never knowing what's around the next bend. And I was wondering, perhaps this is related to that, but at what point did you start writing about your work?
Interestingly enough, my writing career, if you will, started almost at the very same time that I landed my first professional programming gig. And very long story short, I was living overseas at the time, and I was working for, or I should say, on a project in Italy for a company in Italy. And it just so happened that it was PHP based. And at the time, of course, this was 1998, I think. PHP was, of course, just a few short years old at that time. So I was scouring the web for learning resources and happened upon a website that is still around today called devshed.com. And went to the home page. I remember this like it was yesterday. I went to the home page, and there was an ad, a banner on the front page that said DevShed is looking for authors. And I thought, wow, that sounds like it might be interesting. So I emailed the individual running the site. It was a gentleman named Randy Cosby, and sent along a couple article ideas for both PHP and MySQL related topics. And as I mentioned, they were looking for authors. So Randy was excited that somebody had inquired, I guess. And next thing I know, I was writing regular articles for the website, and really enjoyed that. And really, interestingly, that began what I commonly refer to as my two careers in the software industry. One, hands-on doing development and consulting, and the other, a much more, let's call it, academic career in which I was at least attempting to educate my fellow developers in some fashion. And that project led to work for, now I'm dating myself, this was a long time ago, I did some early tutorials for the very new mysql.com at the time. And again, they were very happy to receive material, I guess, and wrote for zen.com, wrote for O'Reilly.net when they were actively publishing tutorials, Web Review, and a wide variety of publications that were really popular at the time, I guess. And a lot of those have gone away. But what that did was give me experience, right? I prior to that had really no writing experience other than that gained at college writing the occasional essay. So this was a great way to formulate my thoughts and, I guess, prove to myself that I understood whatever that topic was. And again, back then it was primarily PHP and MySQL. And over the years, again, that led to writing for Linux Magazine, to Tech Target, so a wide variety of publications. And it gave me, I guess, the experience to, again, formulate these thoughts and try and communicate a usually highly technical topic in a understandable way. And I continued doing that very regularly, certainly on a monthly basis, all the way up through graduating from college. I returned to the United States, finished my degree, and I'm not sure, it was 2 weeks after I had graduated that I received an email from a gentleman named Gary Cornell, who was a founder of A-Press, the computer book publisher. And Gary said in the email, I also remember this like it was yesterday, I really like your PHP articles. Do you want to write a book? And I had never in a million years considered this idea of writing a book, and thought, well, again, I had just graduated. I was doing some contract work even at that time. And I responded and said, sure, let's do this. And ended up writing a book that was called Programmer's Introduction to PHP 4.0. And that published in January of 2001, if I'm not mistaken. I effectively dropped everything and wrote that book over the course of about 4.5 months. Okay. And I mean, I dropped everything and just wrote full time because I was so excited about this interesting opportunity. And that book published, and it did moderately well, but what that did was really give me the writing bug and really motivated me to devote an increasing amount of time to writing. And that led to the next book, which published in 2004, and the next in '05. And here we are. This is hard to believe, but 14 years later.
Yeah.
And I just published the 9th book through Leanpub. So it's, and I guess along the way, I stepped further into the publishing industry. I had spent several years working as A-Press's open source editorial director. So acquiring books that fell into the open source genre of all types, Linux, MySQL, Postgres, you name it, pretty much anything exciting that was open source related. I worked with authors to publish their books, so that was a lot of fun as well. But here we are again, 14, 15 years later, and still writing away and still having a great time doing it.
That's a really great story. I have obviously quite a few questions about your opinions about publishing and the industry and where it's going, and your experience. But I before I get to those, I just got a couple of other questions I'd like to ask about. I know that you're a co-founder of the annual CodeMash conference, which is the largest multi-day developer event in the Midwest. And I was just wondering if you could explain a little bit about what CodeMash is and why you helped found it.
Sure. CodeMash is an annual event that is held here in Northern Ohio in a town called Sandusky, Ohio, which is also home to Cedar Point, the large amusement park, just for point of reference. And CodeMash was started, I guess, 11 years ago, give or take, by myself, a gentleman named Brian Prince, and another gentleman named Jim Holmes. And CodeMash came out of a series of conversations that a group of us had about the Midwest and the lack of, at the time, now this has very much changed, but the lack of tech conferences. Given our three respective professions, it just so happened that we traveled on a regular basis to either, well, really all over the country, but to the East and West Coast primarily, to attend tech conferences. I was at the time working, in fact, for A-Press as an editor, and that meant going out and meeting prospective authors all of the time. Mm-hmm. And one of the best places to do that, logically, is at conferences. Mm-hmm. So I would attend all of the conferences and always marveled over how they were always in California or always in Portland or Seattle or New York or Boston. And this despite there being a very large technical community here in the Midwest. And we just really concluded that the Midwest, and Ohio in particular, wasn't getting its due in that regards, and had the crazy idea, trust me, very crazy idea, that we would change that and start a conference. And that conference became CodeMash. And CodeMash is, I think, a very unique event in that, well, it's held in Sandusky, Ohio, which is not a tech hub for starters, but it also happens to be held in a place called the Kalahari Water Park and Convention Center. And the Kalahari is the largest indoor water park in the United States, among other things. Well, we hold this in January, which Sandusky, being in the northern part of Ohio, is a very cold place, very snowy. So we have this interesting scenario where the weather is usually absolutely horrible, but there's a large group of attendees inside, because the Kalahari is like a small city. It's a very large complex. Inside, wearing shorts and sandals, and it's almost like a tropical environment inside. It's really kind of funny. And so we have the water park. There's all of the things that you might imagine would come with that water park. There's a large arcade. There's there's all sorts of forms of entertainment. But at the same time, the conference, which is now 4 days in duration, hosts, I've lost track, somewhere north of 250 sessions over 4 days.
Oh, wow.
Half-day sessions, which are 4 hours, full-day sessions, which are 8 hours, and then something like 200 one-hour sessions on the Thursday and Friday. We also have something called Kids Mash, which is a companion kids conference. So the attendees, because the Kalahari is a fun place for families to attend, the kids have the opportunity, if they'd like, to attend Kids Mash and learn about robotics and learn about programming and technology in general. So it's certainly earned a reputation as being a very family-friendly conference, and that's something that you certainly do not see at other conference venues.
Yeah.
Over the years, we've hosted a number of different bands. So we've had number of, I guess, rock bands, if you will, play on Thursday night. We have a water park party and all sorts of, there's a game room that goes on, I think, 18 hours a day where you can play Settlers of Catan and all kinds of other interesting games. So it's a lot of fun. A lot of networking goes on. The event has grown to somewhere north of 2,000 attendees. So great networking, great opportunity to learn. And over the years, even as the conference has grown, we've stayed true to the really central idea that it would be low cost. Right? If you go to the West Coast or the East Coast, because the cost of everything is much higher, I mean, the cost to rent a conference center in Portland is just astronomical, right? Because it's so much higher, you wind up paying a pretty hefty price for a conference ticket. Code Mash for all 4 days is just a couple $100. We have a very special hotel rate. Yes, absolutely. And the conference is it's a nonprofit, 506c3, and the committee has certainly stayed true to that tenet of providing this low cost, high quality event, right? And just to clarify, I say we because of course this goes back more than a decade, and I'm still in many ways very wedded to the conference. But I and one of the other co-founders, we call it retired as of last year. So we are consulting members to the board, if you will, which means we complain about whatever, and are generally useless. But it's a great event, and if you're I was going to say anywhere in the Midwest, consider attending. But the reality is, if you're anywhere in the United States, I would suggest giving it a look. We have people from California, Florida, Georgia, Texas. People come from overseas every year, from England, from Germany. So it's grown to be quite a sizable event, and I strongly recommend checking it out.
Yeah, well, thanks for that. It sounds like a really great thing to have created, and very innovative in the best sense of the term. I have just switching gears a little bit. I have a question I read in the introduction to Easy Laravel 5, your Leanpub book, that you've focused on PHP for much of your career, as you've been saying in this interview, but that you wandered away from PHP for a while before coming back to it via Laravel. Can you maybe explain a little bit about this kind of professional journey and why you were sort of losing interest more or less in PHP and why you came back to it?
Yeah, absolutely. Back in, let's say, 2008, 2009, I think the sentiment was shared by a number of other programmers at the time. It had just felt like maybe the PHP language was being passed by, I guess, in a sense. I mean, by other emerging technologies, right? Certainly, this is maybe a general characteristic fault of many developers, myself included, in that you're always looking for the next new, interesting, shiny object to learn about. And there was quite a bit going on at that time. I mean, Node had just come out in 2009. I think Angular had just come out. Rails, of course, was a very, very hot topic at the time. It just seemed like there was a lot going on in these other areas that wasn't necessarily going on in PHP. And it almost sounds like an accusation when in reality maybe I was part of the problem, right? Being an open source project, if I had felt that and others had felt that, maybe we should have attempted to inject some excitement into the community. But at any rate, there were a number of individuals who did do that, right? And I think this sentiment was widely held at the time. And so I had stepped away, and not stepped away. I just had gotten caught up in doing a lot of Rails work at the time, frankly. And but nonetheless, having been involved with PHP for so long over the years, of course, I just kept an eye on what was going on. And out of nowhere, along comes, for instance, Composer, the package manager, which was and still is a huge improvement to the overall workings of PHP application development. And then, of course, a number of frameworks really started to get popular. We saw a lot of micro frameworks come out of nowhere. Laravel came along. Mm-hmm. And all of a sudden, PHP went from being an area that, although still in very widespread usage, I mean, there's no debate about that, just not being a particularly exciting place to be in, suddenly became an incredibly hot topic again. And really, it was Laravel in particular that captured my attention. And, and here we are. I've since written 2 books about the topic. Mm-hmm. But it was really interesting and I think exciting to see this community that has been so prominent for so long. Really, it has this second wind right now, or maybe third wind. But I think there's really no more exciting time than now to be a PHP developer, which is pretty cool considering the language is, I guess, technically 20 years old, right? And you can't really say that about a lot of programming languages. It's just a very exciting time for PHP developers, and I'm glad to be part of it.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Speaking about your books, I noticed that sometimes you involve the idea of getting the person who's reading the book involved in the development of a real world project, and I found the Arcade Nomad project to be fascinating in particular. And after I read it, lost some time doing retro gaming.
Right.
I was specifically Shinobi, which I'd forgotten that if you touch someone or something, you just die.
That's right.
There's no health points or anything like that. You're just gone.
I have a Shinobi arcade game in my house. Yeah, here in my house. It's one of my favorite video games of all time.
Oh yeah, it's fantastic. But on that topic, I noticed that. Well, I guess actually before I move on, I have a question related to that. But can you give us a little bit of a description about what the Arcade Nomad project is, and what inspired it?
Sure. So I am a very big believer of including companion projects in the book. So basing the book around some sort of thematic project that would certainly be something that would be a viable real world application that somebody might want to build and maybe turn into a business, right? Mm-hmm. And at the same time, I'm very adamant about only writing about technologies and topics that interest me. Mm-hmm. Because I think you're going to write a better book if you're truly into the topic and interested in the topic. Then I think a better book is going to come out of it. And being a child of the 80s, I spent a heck of a lot of time playing arcade games inside malls and gas stations and grocery stores and you name it. And of course, as the years have passed, those arcade games have become very few and far between. There's, at least here in Ohio, there's almost no arcades left. So I thought it would be interesting to basically build a companion project that would allow fellow interested aficionados, if you will, of arcade games to add their add arcade games that they find out in the wild. Maybe if they're at a gas station or a laundromat or whatever, they could add the game to the site and help fellow arcade gamers find those as they're passing by. So that became the theme project for Easy Active Record for Rails developers. And I had a lot of fun building it. And unfortunately, I don't travel anywhere near as much as I used to, so I don't exactly contribute to the site. But you really want a project that captures the attention or the fascination of the reader, and can hold their attention throughout the course of the book. Mm-hmm. And whether the reader is 20 years old or 50 years old, I think pretty much, I'm stereotyping a bit here, but pretty much everybody in tech can relate to video games at one level or another.
Oh yeah, sorry. On that note, I actually noticed something really an interesting element to your latest book, Easy E-commerce using Laravel and Stripe, in which you have there's sort of a gaming element built into it, where there's this fictitious lawn care company named We Do Lawns.
That's right.
And there's this. I realized that there's this villain who's actually a boss, whom you set up as the surly company owner, Todd McDo, and you as the reader of the book are set up in this narrative where you're actually writing, work for this company owner and trying to sort of satisfy him at the end of each chapter.
That's right. Easy e-commerce using Laravel and Stripe was without a doubt the book that I had the most fun writing, and that was with a co-author, Eric Barnes, who's also the founder of the very popular Laravel News website and newsletter, and had an absolute blast writing this book with Eric. And what the whole concept, if you will, of the We Do Lawns fictional company and its owner, Todd McDo, and its assistant, Patty Organo, came about just during the course of a very early conversation that Eric and I had about the book. And we knew we wanted to do or to base it around a companion project. And I'm pretty sure it was Eric that came up with the idea of the landscaping company, and I think the name as well. And so we bought the domain, because of course that's the first thing you do when you think of any project, right? You rush out and buy the domain before somebody else snaps it up. And that just very quickly evolved into this story within a story, in which we had the company owner, Todd McDo, and he's a very gruff individual who he knows he wants the website, but he doesn't like tech. And so he begrudgingly basically works with you, the reader, to build the site. So we wanted to inject, I guess, even though it's of course a little melodramatic, we wanted to inject this sense of realism into the book, where not only certainly are you learning about Laravel and Stripe, but you're additionally getting some sense of the tension, I guess, that you might encounter when you're working with a client who might not be entirely rational. He might be making odd requests for certain features and things like that. So we just had fun with it. And I think the book is much, much better because of it. We have some really, I hope, funny dialogue at the end of each chapter, in which you're interacting with Mr. McDo and you're telling him about the features, and he's asking questions, very valid questions, and offering his opinion. So, not all tech books need to be boring and dry and very academic in nature. I mean, the reality is you can write a book that people enjoy reading and have fun reading, and hopefully learn something from it that ultimately enriches their careers. And that's the type of book I want to write. And I have a hard time believing I'll ever write a book that does not include some sort of companion project for those very reasons.
On that subject, on the subject of your writing and your experience with publishing and the kind of books you want to write, I wanted to ask you, given you've had experience writing a successful print book and your work with Apress, I'd like to know why you decided to switch to Leanpub.
How many hours do we have? The my interaction with Apress, as I mentioned, goes back 15 years now, and I'm still great friends with many of their employees, and their Apress is very much a part of me in many ways. But and you're right. I did write a very successful book for Apress that has been in print for 11 years next month, and that's very hard to believe. The book is called Beginning PHP and MySQL, in its 4th edition, and that was published in June of 2004. So we're fast approaching its 11th year in print, and I mean, by any measure, that's a rare, extraordinarily lucky outcome or result to have a book that's been in print that long. But, and granted, I mean, and of course, I've had a royalty stream for 11 years because of that book, and it's worked out great. I can't imagine it could have worked out any better, right? So logically, and believe me, I've been asked this question many times, right? Logically, why would you not continue working in that fashion, right? Mm-hmm. And the answer is, I think, complicated, but it really boils down to several key factors. First and foremost being control, right? I have complete control over how I write the book, how I go about writing the book, what my schedule is going to be for the book, how I want to market the book, right? Do I want to sell it just electronically, or do I want to do a print book, which I have done. I self-published easy PHP websites with the Zen framework back in 09 and 10, and I published that as a real deal print book through a real, very famous computer book printer up in Michigan called Malloy, and went through the process of really publishing it in a very traditional fashion, right? Mm-hmm. I've since moved away from that because electronic format has become, without a doubt, the predominant way to purchase computer books these days. But, it's certainly control is a big part of it. I control all of those factors now, and I very much like that. But let's not beat around the bush here. It also comes down to the revenue side. Right, and Apress is almost becomes irrelevant when we move on to the revenue side, because all traditional book publishers generally structure their compensation agreements, their royalty agreements, in the very same way, right? Mm-hmm. Typically, an author gets an advance, which could be anywhere between, let's call it $3,000 and $6,000 or $7,000 these days. And there's also the royalty stream that comes from it, which typically, this does vary a bit, but typically starts at 10, 12%. Okay? Mm-hmm. And what a lot of first-time authors do not understand is that comes from the net sale of the book. So if a book has a price tag of, let's call it $50, it's sold into a chain, Amazon, what have you, at a discount, because logically the retailer needs to make money, so they're not buying it at list, they're buying it at a discount. And I'm just throwing out a number here. To keep this straight, let's say it's 50%. Mm-hmm. So a $50 book is sold in at $25. That is the number from which royalties are calculated. Mm-hmm. Okay, so and again, just using the number 10% to keep this simple, $25 sell-in gives the author a $2.50 per unit royalty. Okay. And there's a million different other factors that come into play in regards to that money. That money, of course, is paid out a quarter in arrears. So you're looking at 6 months before you see that money. But of course, the advance needs to be recouped, which makes perfect sense. But also, a certain percentage of those royalties are held often up to a year and a half because of potential returns, right? Which these days is really kind of irrelevant considering almost everything is electronic, right? Or print on demand. So there's a lot of revenue related factors that come into play as well. Now, granted, this is not, and I want to be very clear about this is not to imply that a publisher is, taking you, behind the woodshed in terms of making money, because they have editors, they have marketing, they have printing, they have production, they have offices, they have all of this infrastructure that self-publishers logically do not have. And that's a great benefit to a lot of first-time authors because, you get an editor, which are expensive. You get a marketing team. You get all of these extra things, right? But that plays a big part in determining what, in terms of the monetary side, what you wind up earning. And I invite everybody to pull out their spreadsheet and do some math to figure out how many copies you have to sell, again, using that $2.50 per book number to make to make a decent amount of money. You have to sell a lot. You have to sell a lot, especially when you take into consideration the certainly hundreds, if not thousands of hours that you've put into writing the book, right? Mm-hmm. And that's a big deal. That's a big deal. Now, on the flip side of that, working through a service such as Leanpub, Leanpub, and I'm very happy that they are, because obviously Leanpub has its expenses. Leanpub's only taking 10% of the sale, meaning the author gets 90%, mm-hmm. right? It completely turns, quite literally, and given the example that we're using, that revenue agreement upside down, right? The author, the content creator, earns the majority of the money derived from the sale. Mm-hmm. And again, I invite everybody to run those numbers. They're completely different. Now, you do not have a marketing team. You do not have editors. There are a lot of things that you do not have. But because that revenue model was flipped on its head, you only have to sell a fraction of the number of books that you would otherwise have to sell through a publisher to earn the same amount of money. So maybe went on a bit of a tangent there, but it's very important, I think, that people who are weighing whether they should use a traditional publisher or a self-publishing service such as Leanpub, I think it's very important that they understand that dynamic. Because although, if you ask the question to any publisher, they're going to be perfectly clear and explain that very matter to you, I still think it's lost on a lot of first-time authors. So there's the control side of things, and there's the revenue side of things, and of course there's the customer side of things. When working through a publisher, I have no idea who bought my book unless they email me, right? I have no idea. Mm-hmm. And using a publishing service such as Leanpub, of course, I can email those authors through the Leanpub interface, which I do on a regular basis, interact with many, many more readers than I would otherwise be able to working through a traditional publisher, and that's an aspect of book writing that I absolutely love. It's really great to find out what other people are working on and how they're using my book to accomplish that. Maybe jumping back to the revenue and control side of things again, another great advantage of self-publishing is the flexibility. When you take a look at the Easy Laravel book, for instance, I sell the book. I also sell the book plus 3.5 hours of video. Mm-hmm. I also sell the book plus the videos plus consulting, right? If you would like to consult over Skype, maybe I could look at your code. Maybe I could explain some of the more complex aspects of Laravel or PHP in general. There's that option as well. And those options just aren't, because of the nature of the beast when it comes to traditional publishing, those options really aren't readily available. You can't do that stuff so easily, right?
Oh yeah, well, and on that note, I mean, thank you very much for that. I really appreciate all the detail. I think you explained everything very well. And yeah, on that note, when it comes to doing things that maybe couldn't be done before, and in particular in relation to royalties, that's one of our big hopes for what there's this sense in which we're hoping to kind of unlock the creation and the successful publication of books that it previously would never have been written. Because let's say you're writing, especially in the technical space, let's say you're a specialist and there's only 1,000 other people out there in the entire world who are sort of sophisticated enough in an area to be interested in reading a book. Well, conventionally, how would you, what publisher is going to take you up on that? How much of a commitment are they going to really make to it? And how, in a certain sense of a sort of a return, how valuable is it for you as an author to do that? Well, now, with something like Leanpub that pays, 90% royalty minus 50 cents per transaction, if you can reach 500 of those 1,000 people, but sell the book at say $20 or even $50 per book, but you're getting a 90% royalty, suddenly it actually becomes worth it.
Absolutely.
And so there's a whole kind of like new space opened up for especially specialists, but anyone to actually write a book and make some make some get a car or whatever it is you need to do, or pay some tuition for your kids or something like that. It's this whole new way of making publishing valuable to authors.
That's right, and you hit the nail really on the head. That book, if the perceived audience were 500 to 1,000 members, that book just would not be signed. And logically, I mean, mm-hmm. This makes perfect sense. A traditional publisher is just not going to look at that, because it would be in turn a hard sell for them to get it into the retail chains, right? I mean, what retail chain is going to want to put a pre-order in on a book that has such a small perceived audience, right? Whereas with Leanpub, that is if an author can turn around and reach those 500 members or the 1,000 members, that for all involved is a fantastic outcome.
Yeah, and I completely agree. And one of the interesting things that's kind of unlocked by this approach as well is that including self-publishing, is that and in progress publishing that you can do with Leanpub, is that especially in the technology space where things can move really fast. That's why with some of our authors that we've spoken to, they're like, well, as much as they love their publisher, maybe for a lot of people had their first or second book published conventionally, but they're like, but one person, I forget who it was, one of the first interviews we did for this podcast series, said that he had between starting a book and having it appear in the bookstores, he had a child.
Absolutely.
And the world moves on, from when you start writing to when something gets finished, and that the timeline of a conventional publisher just often actually leaves. Your book comes out and it's, like you were a thought leader when you started reading it, but no one knew that. And by the time it comes out, it looks like just conventional stuff.
And this is a very good point. And I can draw upon very recent experience with the Easy Laravel 5 book. That book published on February 4th or 5th of this year. And I tallied it up coincidentally yesterday. I have released 105 updates to that book since February 4th. Bug fixes, new chapter, improvements to sections, you name it. 105 updates, okay? If that book had gone through a traditional publisher, when that February 4th date hit and the book was released, you're looking, unless there is a really egregious error like showstopper, you're looking at minimum 6 months for updates to occur, just because that's just the way it works. There's just a process that is just necessarily lengthy to do those sorts of updates. Now put that, contrast that with what I've just done here over the last 3 months. I released 105 updates to readers, and it's so easy through Leanpub. I mean, I manage everything in GitHub, obviously write the book in Markdown, manage it in Markdown, and maybe a reader emails me and says, hey, this changed, and this just happened last week. This changed in Laravel. You need to update this path. No problem. I open up Sublime, make the change, commit the change, go into the Leanpub interface, publish new version. If it's a big change, I tell the readers. If it's not, I just do the update and not bother anybody. And it's great. I mean, in terms of writing environments, and I think I've used them all over the years, whether it's Word or DocBook, LaTeX, you name it. This is the perfect writing environment. I can write the book in my code editor, which also happens to be Sublime. I can use the very same tools that I use every day for other work to namely GitHub, to manage the book. And then, and maybe most importantly of all, I can use the Leanpub production mechanism. I press the magic button and the book is formatted. Having gone through in 2009, 2010 with my first self-published book, I went out, and this is how insanely stupid I am sometimes. I went out and bought InDesign, spent $700 or whatever it was, laid out the book myself to printer specifications at the time, because that book was printed as well as an electronic format, and just had a horrible time managing all of that and making the book look good. And used DocBook in a subsequent book. That was great too, but still quite a process, a chore, right? That's not my strength. I'm not a production editor. I want to write. I don't want to make the book look good. I mean, I want it to look good, but I don't want to invest my time in doing it. And Leanpub does that flawlessly. The book it looks professional. It looks great. I mean, I don't know what else. I could go on and on about how great it was.
Well, thanks very much. I mean, we really appreciate hearing that. It's been customer development is a very important sort of philosophy at Leanpub. The Steve Blank kind of philosophy, and it's been it's been through interacting with people, with the authors directly, that we've managed to build the Leanpub engine, as it were, to something that is hopefully a more or less auto magical book creation button now.
That's right.
Actually, I've got a very, and again, thank you very much for your kind words. I actually have a very kind of a working author kind of question for you. I noticed that all your Leanpub books have the minimum and suggested prices set to the same amount. And for anyone listening, on Leanpub, authors actually set a suggested price for their book, which is presented to customers on their landing page, but they can also set a minimum price that is lower than that. And Leanpub customers can actually take a slider and slide that down to the minimum price if they want to, or they can slide it up and even pay more than the suggested price. So yeah, Jason, I was wondering what led to your decision to make the minimum and suggested prices the same on all your books?
This is going to be a very anticlimactic answer. I've never given it that much thought. I mean, it's definitely a cool feature of Leanpub. And you see, I'm always scouring the Leanpub catalog and just looking at the different books because it interests me more than anything else. And I see that a lot of authors do set those differently. I don't know. I just haven't given it that much thought at that level of detail. Basically my approach to pricing is really simplistic and really underscores my general lack of expertise in that side of publishing. I start out by setting a price that I think is reasonable and fair and reachable by your average reader. It's not something too extraordinarily expensive, and which tends to fall around $30 more or less. And then I will slightly tune it, which is another great aspect of self-publishing. I will start to tune it in the weeks that follow. If the book is not selling as many copies as I had maybe thought, well, then logically I'll drop the price a couple dollars. Mm-hmm. And over the period of weeks, I basically try and find the perfect balance for the book price. But I just haven't given the whole minimal pricing concept much more thought than that. I'm just trying to find a fair and reasonable price, and I leave it at that, and basically put the majority of my time and effort into continuing to improve the book as quickly as possible following that initial publication.
Yeah, well, thanks for that. I think that's a great answer. It includes a lot of things, including changing the price over time, but also taking into account where your energy and attention ought to be best directed when you're working on a project. And we've had some authors who they really think, they just obsess over pricing and what's the psychological impact of having a different minimum price from a suggested price, and that doesn't necessarily mean they'll do it one way or the other, but they really like. But other people are like, the pricing is not something that I want to spend a lot of time thinking about. Yeah, obviously people will adjust it and maybe have sales like a coupon on Twitter every once in a while. But it's a really interesting thing how sometimes the way you optimize your process is by sticking to the things you really care about and not trying to be someone you're not and get involved in a type of customer engagement maybe that isn't just something you're really interested in.
To the audience, I'm sitting here listening to this and really smiling ear to ear, because that in a nutshell describes the transition that I've made as a self-publisher over the last 6 years. Back in 2009, when I published the Zen Framework book, as I mentioned earlier, I was doing the production myself. I designed the cover myself, and if you've ever seen anything I designed, I am horrible at it. Designed the original cover myself. I had an e-commerce site set up through wjgilmore.com, so I was managing the sales myself. Well, I ask everybody, how much time did I have left to write books? Mm-hmm. Not much, because I was dealing with all of this other stuff that were not my core competencies, right? And over time, as I learned the hard lessons in regards to understanding what my core competencies are, writing books and hopefully talking to a lot of customers or potential customers about those books, sticking to those competencies rather than trying to be a control freak and manage everything else, right? In the last 8 months or so, I published the Active Record book in August on Leanpub, has without a doubt been, from a writing perspective, the most productive 8 months of my career. There is no question. Let's see, 200. I've written, over 500 pages of published material, and have at least another 500 pages in development right now. So, and I mean, without a doubt, not dealing with production, not dealing with e-commerce, not dealing with cover design has freed up the time to do that. So, I mean, a very important lesson there to be learned, because it's easy to get caught up in pricing and fret over that, and easy to get caught up in all this other stuff that is not part of not only what you're good at, but what you enjoy doing. I never enjoyed that stuff, right? I mean, I guess the e-commerce stuff was that's always been fun, but I just never liked that other stuff. I like writing, and I that's all I want to do.
It's interesting that in the context of technical publishing, but it reminds me of an old colleague of mine who, when he's an English professor, and when his first book of poetry was published, I talked to him about it, and he said, of all the things I had to go through to get my book published, almost none of them had anything to do with writing poetry.
That's right.
So yeah, it's true. It's true across genres because of the way the industry has always worked.
I mean, to be frank, though, I mean, even in self-publishing, the last 20% of the time spent on any book, self-published or otherwise, is by far the most stressful and the most time-consuming, precisely because you have a million little details to wrap up. And I think I would love to know, I'd love to be the fly buzzing around every would-be author's room, because it's that time that I believe most book projects wind up dying, because the author becomes so tired and frustrated with himself and with the process that there are probably countless books that have never been published simply because that last 20% of the project is so rough. So, by removing all of these other very important tasks from my stack, I can power through that 20% much, much more effectively than before.
On that note, actually, I have one last question for you.
Sure.
Is there anything on Leanpub that you would like us to improve, or that something that you think is missing, or that would just make your workflow even better?
I would say that the book cover, the dedicated book pages are great. I mean, in that they serve the very obvious purpose of telling would-be customers about the book's contents. I think those could use some work. Okay. And again, this is coming from, I just told you I have zero design acumen, so I would not be the person to do that. But I think there would be some interesting opportunities to give authors the ability to add even more content to the book and maybe organize it a little better. Okay. One of the reasons that I have companion websites for each book, Easy Active Record book. Is it book? EasyActiveRecord.com, EasyLaravelBook.com, EasyEcommerceBook.com. One of the reasons why I have those companion sites and maintain those, which is tedious, is precisely because I can provide even more potential information to readers. Now, at the same time, I appreciate very much there being a single page for the book. The admin interface, you go in, you can use HTML source if you want in some cases, you can use Markdown in some cases. It's very streamlined. You can input the information, hit update, and be done with it. So there's two sides to that coin, right? On the one side, it's very streamlined and great. On the other side, I just wonder if there would be the opportunity to add a little bit of additional information. But I mean, other than that, I very much enjoy the service. I mean, as your colleagues know, I email hello@Leanpub probably once every 2 weeks saying, did you know this is, broken or whatever, and little minor things. And I think, boy, these guys must really get irritated when they see.
No, quite the opposite. Quite the opposite. That's I mean, that's some of the most important work we do is listening to people, and I'm not saying that in a precious way. Like, it really is like that some of the most important work we do is listening to people. And of course, I've been saying this to someone recently, but one of the wonderful things about working with authors is that they like to write. And they have long attention spans. And so it's sort of like the perfect kind of customer to have for customer development is, people who think hard about what they're doing and are investing a lot of time and thought in what they're doing. And sometimes their books are, very important to them in terms of professionally, in terms of intellectually, and also personally. And so, any feedback we get is very good for us, and we really appreciate it. I wanted to say, thanks for that feedback about how we might be able to improve those initial pages in the book, and also for what you were saying about your websites, because I noticed in particular with easyactiverecord.com, you have a what readers are saying section, which would something like that would where people can put testimonials would probably be really useful and much
those sell books,
much appreciated.
Right?
Yeah.
They have very profound impact on book sales. Yeah, I mean, stuff like that, right? Stuff to really polish the edges of the page, because fundamentally, the important material is there, right? I mean, you guys definitely nailed that. Mm-hmm. But polishing the edges and adding those, again, optional features. They don't have to be mandatory, but certainly. Maybe that. I guess now that the gears are turning, it would be interesting to receive a little bit more in terms of customer demographics. For instance, country, right, or state. Little details like that, because that helps. If I wanted to do a Facebook campaign, mm-hmm. which I'm running right now, or a Twitter campaign, advertising campaign, well, because you can highly target individuals, and hopefully put your book in front of them, your advertisement, mm-hmm. having that sort of information, I understand why Leanpub doesn't divulge unless the reader allows it. Right. I totally understand that, why Leanpub doesn't divulge all of the customer details, but having some general information, state, country, city, or in any other, I guess, optional information, profile information that the customer, again, mm-hmm. would like to divulge, mm-hmm. that would be pretty useful. Mm-hmm. That would be pretty useful.
Okay, yeah. No, thanks for that. That's a really good suggestion. And we do have some Google Analytics, I think, that you can use for tracking kind of people who come to your webpage or to your.
I do use that.
People who convert.
Yep.
But as you say, obviously for us, there's always this trade-off, right, where we know something might, having more information. Obviously, the kind of author who's into it wants to have, as much information, and publishers who use Leanpub as well, want to have as much information as they can. But we also, it's very important to us to protect readers, so that so that information that's important to them isn't being, that we don't basically want people to opt out. That's just not very. That's right. Leanpub to make
totally agree with you there.
So I mean, people can opt in to share email addresses with authors and things like that. But, and so, for example, the feature you were describing earlier where you can actually email your readers, that's done through, as you said, that's done through the Leanpub kind of form, so that actually they don't see your email address and you don't see theirs.
That's right. Right.
So that's something that we've had a lot. There are people that that actually is kind of there's a certain type of author for whom that is a deal breaker. They're like, I want my list.
Absolutely.
And I want as much information as I can get about the customers, and that's just always a trade-off for us, and we've got a pretty straightforward position on it. But it's always something that we can kind of work to improve and maybe even be just clearer about.
Yeah, and my answer to that is a simple one, because I've had this very conversation with other Leanpub authors and customers about that concept, and if you are adamant about collecting other customer information, which I get that side of it as well. I understand that. Mm-hmm. Well, then there are other services out there in which you can do that. If that is what you need, then go there, mm-hmm. or build a list through a newsletter. Right? I mean, there are other ways in which I do exactly that. I manage my email list through, in my case, MailChimp. Mm-hmm. And use Leanpub for a significant part of my sales. So it's Leanpub strikes, in my opinion, an appropriate balance in that regard, because I put myself in the position of the reader. If I'm the reader, do I necessarily want to divulge, my details to a potential author? I don't know. Maybe, but as the customer, I appreciate having that choice.
Yeah, well, thanks very much for that. I think our time is just about up, but thanks very much for being on the Lean Publishing Podcast and for being a Leanpub author.
Oh, it's my pleasure, and thank you very much for your time.
Thanks.